Get ready to go. No, that's actually really interesting. So while I'm kind of, as we go along, we'll have the guys here kind of help out some of the more technical, minor issues that we're having. Having what you just said, Berge, and I know some viewers don't know the difference so much between 4G and 5G. Would you be able to explain a little bit of the difference between the two?
Sure. In fact, let's start even earlier. When I started working in Armenia, for example, there was only 2G. And 2G is primarily voice-oriented. We had texting capabilities, and we had the ability for people to have competitive wireless operators. But 3G introduced the first beginnings of the wireless internet, the mobile internet, and 4G made mobile internet the very common way of people connecting to the web and to applications. So today's world, for example, depending on whether you're in iOS or Android, but we live on apps. Our wireless experience is really tied to the app world we use, and we connect those apps to the internet, and it makes a holistic experience. Even this Zoom could be done on a wireless phone. But 5G really makes the integration between the fixed line network and the wireless network possible, so that the scale, the speed, the latency of wireless begins to approximate that of which you could experience on fiber optic networks. And in fact, sitting right behind the radio of a 5G base station is fiber optic connections. So it's extremely fast, a lot of capacity. You can use your wireless as though you're on a wireline connection, and you can use it moving around and not having to be in one place. So the benefit of
I noticed that we're sort of just cutting in and out. Are you able to hear me right now?
I can hear you fine. I'm not surprised that we're cutting in and out, because you're in Armenia and I'm in outer space. And I can look down on Armenia over my shoulder. I can see the Black Sea, and I can see
lower latency between here and space with 5G.
It happens. It happens. You know, I came up here to get a little rest from COVID. There's no COVID in outer space, so that's the good news.
Flights to outer space, actually, and I've noticed they've been booked. So it seems like it's a popular destination to get into space these days because of the COVID situation.
Well, there are no flights into Zavatnots Airport, so I thought maybe outer space would be easier if I want to stop by Armenia on my way home.
Now, where did you fly out, if you don't mind me asking real quickly?
Oh, here we have a space terminal. It's run by Elon Musk, and I took a private flight up to space.
Okay, so in case if you cannot hear me right now, Berge.
I hear you fine.
Okay, as we hear you now, perfect. So just to kind of, again, to the viewers listening or that will be listening in the future, this is a recorded video interview. Definitely do apologize for technical difficulties. I know you kind of crunched more on time, Berge, so I kind of go through some of the more questions that I felt were kind of more interesting. Now, there's cities that are implementing 5G technology right now. Cities like LA, South Korea, London, for instance. Small countries like Armenia, for instance, what are some of the benefits they could have for a small country like Armenia to be implementing 5G technology?
So Korea is the most advanced with 5G at the moment. China is right behind them. And China is by no means a small country. Korea benefits by having a small geographic area and very advanced technologies and companies, both on the operator side and on the vendor side. So they've been more or less a pace setter for 5G around the world. I will correct one thing you said, and that is that in London, they'll be going backwards on 5G for some time because there was a recent ruling to remove all the Huawei equipment from London, from the UK actually, and that's going to set them back quite a bit. In the United States, just as an example, we happen to have several different carriers that have different capabilities and resources for 5G. Verizon has very high band spectrum, and their 5G networks are very small coverage, but very high speed, and only in the urban centers of large cities. There are about 20 cities that Verizon has a very small footprint of 5G available. So if you happen to be there and you happen to have a 5G phone at the moment, you can experience the very high speed performance of the Verizon 5G network. T-Mobile just merged with Sprint, and in their case, they have both a very low band 600 megahertz 5G network, which has very good coverage, and they're starting to build out 5G in Sprint's spectrum in the mid-band, and that will give them the speed and capacity that they're looking for. So in some ways, the best of both worlds. AT&T's pacing to keep up with T-Mobile and build out their 5G network, but all of them need more spectrum in order to make the 5G experience very attractive to consumers. So I think it'll be at least until the middle of next year before 5G is very common. People may, if they decide to change their phone, they may upgrade to a 5G phone. But right now, we're still in the early stages of 5G deployment, unless you're in Korea or some parts of China. And we'll see how it unfolds. In Armenia, as an example, I think it's much more important for us to have advanced 4G cover more of Armenia than it is to evolve to 5G too quickly. And especially since we're going through some restructuring of the Armenian mobile and telecom market and new owners and changing hands and things like that, I think the government is going to have to create a way for 5G to be built so that it's not a required service everywhere, but in the parts of Yerevan where it would benefit from it, they do make it available, and you'll see the experience of watching your Netflix wherever you go and being on 5G.
Real quick question, Berge. Now, regarding to regulations with wireless technology in Armenia, what do you think in terms of Armenia should be aware of regarding regulations, or as far as your knowledge, or do they go by certain standards perhaps, or is there anything that you know or you can recommend?
Well, certainly in Armenia, the changes that have occurred really have to do with high tech and making telecom part of the high tech infrastructure. And in order for Armenia to keep pace with the world market, the telecommunications infrastructure and the wireless infrastructure also has to keep pace. So I know I've spoken to Minister Arshakian, and he's well aware that Armenia needs to step up and be part of the world community along with 5G in order for Armenia to keep pace with the evolution of apps, the functionality, and to be able to build companies that can compete in the world market and take advantage of that same capability.
Okay, great. Now, you did talk about a little bit about your backgrounds, but I know you had a lot of influence in the IT sector here in the last 20 years, more particular in the early 2000s. Would it be possible if you could kind of briefly tell us about some of your contributions that you did in the early 2000s here?
Well, certainly I don't want to overstate my role relative to others, but in the early 2000s, there were a bunch of diasporans who had various roles in the tech sector in their respective countries or in the market, in the broader market. And we were asked to come to Armenia to help form an advisory council. We called it the Armenian High Tech Council. And we were supporting what was a very embryonic industry at that time. After independence, what was high tech or software development had been kind of shattered and broken into pieces. The market was really in a bad way. You know, fortunately, we were able to bring foreign investors, other companies from the world market to Armenia. And in the early stages, you saw a lot of acquisitions and investments by companies from overseas, which led to companies like Synopsys coming to Armenia. You know, you've seen the continuous introduction. VMware is now in Armenia, has a large workforce there. So these world-class companies have elevated the Armenian tech sector, but we've also switched to a startup orientation. So now we have hundreds of startups, and I certainly have been one of the people, certainly not the only one, but one of the people who's both been a mentor to startups and as well an angel investor to the extent possible. And we have now venture capital companies that work with Armenian startups. So I think we've moved into a period now where the innovation, the technical prowess of our companies, the business sense has allowed companies like PixArt to emerge and be a role model for what a company can become if they were to drive toward innovation and you know, a unique unicorn. I think that's just a small example, but everybody would like to be PixArt, I think, right?
No, I think you're right. And it's funny, I'm glad you kind of touched up about the startup sector, what you were just mentioning a little bit earlier, because I want to kind of segue into the next question I actually have for you. You and I seen a reasonable amount of growth in the tech sector, more particularly in the last 10 years. So I know that we could probably say in terms of startups in Armenia, perhaps semiconductor-based startups were maybe more active in the early 2000s. And now, you know, we've been seeing this boom in the last 5-7 years with software SaaS-based related startup companies. My question is, how do you think Armenia what could Armenia do to almost become a startup nation similar to Israel, for instance? What are we doing now that we could be doing, you know, into the future to kind of get to closer towards that goal?
Well, certainly if you take Israel as an example, they've used their defense industrial complex to build the tech sector around encryption or in terms of security and other kinds of technologies that have a unique requirement in the defense industry, surveillance, and Armenia has similar characteristics in terms of the role of the military. In fact, we've been experiencing that in Armenia for the past few days as we are under attack in the north. And I haven't seen as much emphasis on building companies around that need in the drone sector or in the surveillance monitoring, being able to detect when potential threats are in around and what to do about it, and how to build resilient networks that hold up even when you know, you see military activity. So Armenia could certainly do a lot to build defense-oriented or military-oriented high-tech sector. And certainly we've always had the challenge, and I know from the beginning, where because there is a requirement that people serve in the military for a period of time in their youth, that we should have a tech core, a technology part of the military that people who are talented and experienced can join and gain more experience either in software or security or other technologies, so that when they come out of the military, they can also be put to work in companies that would have similar kinds of requirements in terms of skills and knowledge and experience. So I think there's a lot of synergy that could take place there. But we've seen a lot going on just in the past few years, perhaps culminating at WCIT. We saw that as a showcase for the Armenian tech sector, but not just pure technology, but applications, companies that are building healthcare and technology enablement around healthcare. This is particularly useful right now with COVID and expanding the capacity of the healthcare system and making it more efficient and effective so we can fight this pandemic, so we can track and trace, so we can help people manage the disease if they have it. So, there are a lot of things that Armenia could do to be more a role model, to not just aspire toward being like Israel, but to being a role model for the region, for the types of countries. If you look up in the area around Estonia and Lithuania, those countries have done very well in tech, and we could aspire to be like them as well. And they were in the former Soviet Union. But I think even in the Caucasus region, there's a lot that we could do to build capacity. And with Iran, for example, if we could get Iran on the right side of foreign policy, that would be very useful.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree with you. And you make some great points. I want to take a quick step back, because I have a real interesting question I want to ask you regarding to wireless networks in Armenia. So as you're one of the diaspora who gave real great influence in actually in the IT sector in general here in Armenia since the early 2000s. So my question would be what is your personal valuation of today's Armenian wireless networks? So for instance, in what aspects have you seen progress, and what aspects of areas do you believe that could be improved?
So the World Bank recently conducted an assessment of Armenia's plans and policies for expanding the availability of broadband access. And I'll tell you, as much as wireless is an important word, if you're describing telecom, broadband is an even more important word. Wireless voice is okay, it's nice to have, it's probably a good thing, but broadband and internet connectivity is what really is going to drive innovation and evolution. And unfortunately, the World Bank's assessment was pretty negative about Armenia. There's a very big digital divide between the urban areas and where people live in villages and in the first mile in remote areas. And both the wireless carriers themselves and the underlying fiber operators have not built out broadband beyond the most populated centers. And that has left at least 20 to 30% of the population living without effective broadband. So Armenia needs a national broadband plan that will both be benefit from wireless and fiber optic infrastructure. Perhaps it needs to be a public-private partnership led by the government, involving the operators themselves. And I think in light of COVID, we've seen that the role of broadband to deliver services, to make people connected, especially in remote areas, is even more critical. So I think the wireless operators we've relied on, because they are profitable and they are providing essential services, we've relied on them to deliver wireless internet. But they're going to go through some big changes. VivaCell, being the largest mobile operator, is a market leader, and Beeline, being number 2 and having the history of being Armentel as well, has a lot of work to do to reinforce their wireless network, make it completely 4G and evolve toward 5G. Ucom, which acquired Orange, has some work to do to take their role as a broadband wireless operator. And now, you know, we've recently seen some changes occurring where Beeline is going to be acquired by Team Telecom. The founders of Ucom are moving in that direction. And we also have Ross Telecom, which has an extensive fiber optic network throughout Armenia. So all of these infrastructure providers have to be leveraged and drawn together by a government initiative to take advantage of wireless infrastructure and fiber infrastructure to expand the coverage of broadband, to improve the speed and capacity and performance, and to create a government-driven agenda that will make sure that digital divide is narrowed and more people are connected to broadband throughout Armenia. I think that's an essential key ingredient for both the society in general and as well the tech sector to continue to succeed.
No, that's great. Thanks so much for your input on that. Berge, what do you think? Do we have time for 2 more questions, or should we save it for another time? I know
I'm okay.
Yeah? All right.
Yep.
So I would say now, you know, Armenia is as the IT early stage startup ecosystem has been growing at a relatively fast pace, especially in the last few years. A question I have, and a question many people have, is for an angel investor, someone like yourself, for instance. What do you look for in startups prior to placing any kind of consideration into getting involved to work with them to some capacity?
So, you know, as the markets evolve towards startups and early stage companies, I've been both involved as a mentor and as well as an angel investor. What I've observed is that startups tend to be driven by technology. They create something new, something that they think is unique, and it may be very narrow as far as what its application is, but they'll build on a technology, but they don't do enough to understand who are the users, what's the use case that drives the adoption of that technology, what is the business case around that, who pays who to what, to do what, and why is that an economically attractive investment? And they also tend to look at funding these companies from a very company-centric view. They don't look at it from the standpoint of the investors and what the investors could expect as a return. It's not a donation. It's not a charitable investment. It is, in fact, a business investment. So investors have to understand what they may get out of it. It may take 5 years, 7 years, but what is it that attracts them to be an investor in a startup? And obviously, the scope of the market is important. If the startup is focusing on a service or a function that's only applicable to Armenia, that's one thing. If it has a regional or global opportunity, and you know that has itself some risk associated with it. If you're trying to expand to serve a global market, perhaps you have to have people outside of Armenia to work. And that's challenging these days, both from a cost perspective and travel and everything else. Right now, startups are in a very difficult position because they can't travel as effectively as they'd like. They can't even go to Europe for many cases. So, you know, it's a difficult time. Startups are going to go through a vetting. I myself am looking hard at the companies I've invested in and the ones who are approaching me. And I'm trying to understand in today's world of, in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and when we might emerge from that, what are the opportunities, challenges, and key criteria that I need to use in evaluating investments, and how the market is going to view them as well.
Okay. Okay, my last question would be is, the next time we have to sit down and chat, would it be possible if I could come to space, or could you come to Armenia?
So I think this is actually quite effective. I can see Armenia from here,
Okay.
and I have a unique view of the universe. It's important for me to gain that perspective. But I think what should happen is the next time we have this conversation, we should make sure we've worked out all the technical difficulties, try not to invent the wheel, and make it work first right away so we don't keep people waiting.
Yes.
And I'm happy to jump in at any point to a conversation if you want to have others as well in the call. We have a lot of colleagues that I'm aware of, and some local to Armenia, some in other countries. So I'm happy. And by the way, I'm looking forward to coming back to Armenia traveling wise and coming down from my position above the earth because, you know, I was there in October and I haven't been back, and I need to see Lake Sevan.
Yes, we miss you. I miss you. And I think that would be a great idea. And I also like the idea as well, too, that you position on getting several other people involved, too, and you know, exchanging dialogue and stuff. I think that's a great, great idea. So, Berge, I don't want to take up any more of your time. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. This is Up to 90 Preezma interviews that we're doing here, interviewing Armenians and non-Armenians who are very influential within and out of the IT sector in Armenia. So,
by the way, Narek, what does up to 90 mean?
Up to 90 is an Irish slang that means being busy. So usually that's associated with having a drink. So this is my makeshift glass of whiskey. So I know it's early in the day for you, so it might be too early to have a whiskey, you know, to kind of have everything tying together with the name of the show.
Well, I'll have a Giligya beer if you don't mind, or
Okay.
perhaps I'll have some wine. But if it's up to 90 means drinking, I can understand that. If it means that only people who are up to the age 90 can participate, I resent that.
Berge, it was good talking to you, Berge. We'll catch up very soon. Thanks again.
Very good.
See you. Bye.